Is getting an environmental degree worth it in college? Many of you have asked me whether getting an environmental degree is worth it for your career, your success, or even your happiness, and I'm here to talk about my experiences. Before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button as it helps continue to grow my channel. So I earned my BS Environmental Science at UC Berkeley, so this is my opinion on the major itself, my experiences in undergrad, but today we're going to talk about specifically of environmental science and what that means. What is environmental science? Environmental science focuses on fundamentally sciences like math, chemistry, biology, physics, atmospheric science, earth science, and geology. As an environmental science major, you'll spend much of your time considering environmental issues, scientific and quantitative aspects. You'll cover both the biological, social, and physical sciences, which gives you a very holistic foundation and a very unique, diverse perspectives of experiences in the field. There are 5 major fields of environmental science, each one made of multiple smaller disciplines. These 5 fields are atmospheric sciences, ecology, environmental chemistry, geoscience, and social sciences. Atmospheric sciences mostly deal with global warming and its effects. Scientists can also create special computer models that depict how atmosphere circulates and how chemicals react with it, and how animals contribute to it. Now, ecologists research a plethora of things, including how a specific species or a group of living creatures are influenced by their environment, or some specific aspects of it. Environmental chemistry looks into the chemical differences of plants, the environment, and the way chemicals get transported through the environment. Geosciences are often considered a branch of planetary sciences, and they explore the chemical and physical constitution of our planet, but also its atmosphere. People interested in environmental science are often curious about the planet, climate change, and how to improve overall ecological well-being. If you're passionate about understanding the environment, an environmental major may suit you. The environmental industry also generates more than $265 billion and more than 125,000 new positions annually in the United States. For many people, you're probably told that the environmental sector isn't a well-paying job compared to business or technology. And the environmental sector is growing hugely fast, so there are plenty of jobs out there, aka think the green economy. So one of the biggest questions I get is what made me choose environmental science? So when a lot of you ask me what my experiences were about choosing an environmental science degree, I'll be honest, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. As a young person, I've always been passionate about the environment, but I barely took classes in K-12 education regarding the environment. I took like an earth science course and then like an intro to geology, I believe. And that wasn't really covered. And I didn't even take EP environmental science, which is here in the United States. So my understanding about climate change and global warming was very limited. It actually wasn't until I was the last year of my high school where I was asked what I wanted to do. And I remember a counselor told me that it looks like you're really interested in the environment and social studies. And I said, well, how do I combine the two interests? And so on my college applications, I remember applying to the University of California, and the only reason why I applied to those schools is that I'm a California resident, and so you get some tuition paid off for if you're a low-income student through the Pell Grant. And so I applied to UC Berkeley, Santa Cruz, Davis, and UCLA, and I remember filling out the environmental majors, and I didn't really know the differences between environmental studies and science, which we'll talk about that later. But I think inside of me, you always know as a young person what you want to do or what the field of study you're told that you're interested in. Like, I knew that I don't think I wanted to become an environmental scientist, but I did realize I want to study something the environment and learn about the math and the science and the social side of it. But I also felt like it was something that was calling within me. I think if you're someone that's really struggling between, is this actually something that I want, I think you need to ask yourself personally, what is it that you want? What is it that your parents want? What is it that society wants from you? Because what society wanted for me is that typically you're gonna go into business, math, or computer science, or what my parents wanted for me is that you get a good paying job. So the environmental degree isn't that as favorable, but I saw myself as saying, I really like the environment. I feel like if I had to decide at 18 what major I wanted to be, I'll do the environmental degree. But I think a lot of you all are so young sometimes to kind of think about what you want to do, and it's okay if your life changes. I think for me, it's just something that was my calling as a young person, is that if I want to be able to talk about environmental issues for my community and other things, then let me go through this academic route to learn this experience. Is environmental science a hard degree? Any type of degree that you study in science or non-science, in my opinion, they all have their pros and cons. You have to be able to recognize your strengths and weaknesses. Science majors generally feature a heavy load of science and math classes. You also need to be asking yourself, are you someone wanting to spend time doing research inside labs or outside? In academia, there's a lot of elitism that is perpetuated in even my own environmental department, where people would say, I'm an environmental science major versus an environmental studies major. And I think it's super important to note that all majors require work. You have to input hours to study and to do well in exams. So my experiences obtaining an environmental science degree is a bit complicit, and I'm here to share a very funny story. When I was in freshman orientation to go to Berkeley, it was like a week before school started, I remember walking into my major's advisor's room where we had to sign up for our freshman courses. And in my head I thought, oh, an environmental science degree, maybe you only have to take one math and one science class. She pulled out the list, and I remember this clearly. She pulled out the list and said, this is the pathway you have to take to get to your degree. I was 18 years old at the time. The classes were listed as Calculus 1, Calculus 2, biology, physics, general chemistry, organic chemistry, environmental economics, environmental statistics, and then there was this other class on environmental forestry with economics. So the higher level courses I had to take, and my jaw dropped down because I said, wait, I thought this is going to be an easy major in my head. Mind you, math and science have never really been my strongest suits, but I've always been well-rounded enough to be able to get by. And most specifically, I'd say I'd struggled the most with math and science. For some reason, science clicked more easily for me than math, even though you use math and science. I don't really understand that. And I remember asking her, like, oh, do you actually think I could do this? And my major advisor told me, Isaiah, you're so young in your career. You have so much to experience, and I do believe that you can get through this. You just need some extra help. And so I would say that I really struggled my first 2 years, which is taking your prerequisite courses, or they're sometimes called the weeder courses to get rid of people, that I struggled the most. I think those were like probably the hardest years of my life because I realized how behind I was coming from a high school that was under-resourced and how much I had to step up in getting, classes and extra tutoring and mentors to help me on those areas that I was struggling with. But that's not to say it was impossible. I do think that it added a lot of stress on my end, and I had constant self-doubt and self-ability to think if I was able to get this degree, because to be honest, in my experiences in undergrad, those first 2 years, I would fail so many midterms. I actually got like some of the lowest scores in some of the classes, and then with the curve, it would still average out to a D or C minus. And so I really struggled a lot to always do well. It wasn't until the finals, which I would actually perform the best that I could to be able to pass those classes. And that was really scary to know that throughout the entire semester. And I actually have this one story in this one class where we were only graded on 2 midterms and 1 final. There's no homework, there's no quizzes, and you had to take this class, and I had failed the first midterm, passed the second midterm, so it was a 50-50 between failing the class or passing it. And I remember taking the final, and I barely passed by I think 2 points, and I passed the class, and I remember laughing with my friends because I said I was literally 2 points away from failing this class. So in terms, I think, if you're asking yourself, is this gonna be an easy degree? I think if you're someone that's very strong suited in math and sciences and the social sciences, I don't think it'll be too difficult for you to navigate, but I do think it's important to recognize where your abilities rely on. So for the upper div environmental science courses, I think that's where I was able to really flourish well. Typically these classes are not necessarily designed for students within those majors to fail. I mean, like the lowest maybe someone will get is like a C minus, but I will say that it was really good to be able to take those prerequisite courses to understand the sciences. I'll give a really great example. I took a class on sustainable fisheries and forestries, which has its own issues. And they taught us essentially to apply calculus, to use it to understand how to harvest sustainably. And while I have critiques about the class itself, I do think that it helped prepare me to understand the mathematical sides of what goes into these industrial models. And this other class I took it was about environmental science and research methodologies course. They taught us how to use these data science programs that you use in labs for your own research. And they also taught you how to write research papers in a certain format, which I didn't have any experience on. So I do think that when you're taking your upper div environmental science courses, you're able to have more flexibility in what courses you're able to choose. But I do also recommend for individuals that are sometimes scared about, what specialty they want to do. I made sure that I took a holistic round of what I wanted. So I learned environmental statistics, I learned about environmental philosophy, I took agriculture courses. And to me, that really helped me understand how these subjects were interconnected. I don't think if I didn't take them, it wouldn't have made that much sense for me. And I also think that you have so much flexibility in choosing within your own programs or your colleges that you can focus on a certain specificity. I think for me in my upper div courses, I was able to take less heavy math and science courses, but I still had to take some that use math and science, so you can't really, obliterate them from your course schedule, but you have to be mindful that you need to be able to apply a lot of the old things that you learned into your upper div courses. But I also be honest that once I graduated, a lot of the information I learned in undergrad, I barely remember any of it. I learned the terminology and some of the math behind it, but I'm very rusty when it comes to reviewing certain types of materials because it's been almost 4 or 5 years since I've graduated college. The next question is getting an environmental degree a diverse field? The reality of this question is that it's not diverse. The environmental science industry needs to actually push forward for diversity. And here's some factoids that I pulled up for you all. The most common ethnicity of environmental scientists is white, which is 86%, followed by Hispanics or Latinos, 4.7%, Asians, 3.6%, and African Americans, 1.3%. 38.3% of all environmental scientists are women and 61.7% are men, and we are missing our non-binary babies too. For queer and trans representation of the environmental science is around 8% LGBT. But what about some of the good facts? And here's some of the things I want to share with you. In 2021, women earned 99% of what men earned in the field. Environmental scientists are 70% more likely to work in different companies like for-profit companies. Environmental scientists are most in demand in Minnesota for some reason. And the technology industry for the climate tech field is one of the highest paying fields that you can enter. So there is a lot of opportunities that exist, but there's also a lot of work that needs to be done in order to be able to change this industry for the better. Okay, so one of the most funniest experiences that I tell people to describe environmental majors is Teva sandals, Patagonia jacket, Patagonia hat, or some beanie, the granola crunch hydro flask, shorts sometimes, just the typical what you would see in this idea of granola environmentalist. And I look the complete opposite of that. First of all, I'm someone that's non-white. Second of all, I'm someone that dressed a lot of stylish. I had style in college. I mean, here's some few photos that actually, when I would try to dress up myself, with my own style. But I think I realized that the main thing is the lack of people of color and the lack of Black and Indigenous people in these environmental programs. Yes, I'm Latino myself, but there was very few Latinos that were there too. And so I think right off the bat, that did turn me off about UC Berkeley, because I think many predominantly white institutions and colleges proclaim themselves as safe spaces, but then you enter, the professor doesn't look like you, the graduate student instructors or the TAs, they don't look like you, and then your own classmates don't look like you. So it does add an effect of not so much, yes, isolationism, but this idea of am I able to actually truly express my values? And I think one of the hardest things that I found in the environmental programs is my ability to relate to certain of my peers. A lot of my peers grew up hiking, going kayaking, doing all these really great sports, and I didn't ever have any money, nor green spaces, nor access to these spaces. So my experiences in going camping or other things like that was not really applicable to a lot of the conversations that they would have. And I'm not saying they're an issue for that, right? I'm saying that for a lot of marginalized communities, like since you're already in a space where there's limited people of color, you tend to think, oh, well, my experiences are not valid. Their experiences are more valid because they've been to these spaces, they've had those experiences, and they are talking about it so eloquently. But the truth is that a lot of us were environmentalists. And so I had a really hard time realizing, like, if there's barely any people of color, yet along any queer people, I felt like there was an extra layer of me having to decide, okay, if you're going to be a person of color, then be it, but just hide your sexuality, because there was a lot of homophobia and transphobia in these spaces. And when I mean that I hid my sexuality, I mean I hid it in quote unquote professional spaces, like in research labs. Like I was very professional, never talked about my experiences, never talked about my identity, but I felt like I was losing part of myself for not being true to that. And I also felt like a lot of the professors and graduate student instructors didn't care about that. They just saw everyone as quote unquote equal human beings. But the truth is, like, no, we don't have the same equality. We don't have the same resources. And so the statements of in academia that I would heard is that if I can do it, anyone can do it, assumes that justice, equity, inclusion were already implemented before. So to me, that's where I felt like it was really horrific. But I will say that in the environmental science industry I was in my undergraduate majors, we actually had a very high balanced amount of women in the departments, and few men in the environmental science department. But I do think it is also to acknowledge that these research academic spaces are heavily male dominated, and even the professors were heavily white men, so barely any white women too. So it's like there is this huge gender gap that exists in there, but it's not to say that you won't find anyone. I think for myself, I found a really great group of environmentalists of color that really held it down with me to understand my own personal experiences in that. And I tell people that finding community really kept me going through that whole 4 years, because I think I would have really lost myself or abandoned the major itself to say it's not for me. But I think I stuck through it because there was still people of color I can talk to. And so the very less than 10 people of color in my environmental science program, we stuck together in terms of like, hanging out with each other and recognizing that our oppressions were interconnected. And a lot of times we weren't able to really have a safe space to vocalize that, so we vocalized that within ourselves. The next question is, what do I do if I feel like I'm not doing the right environmental major for myself? I think as young people, we're forced to believe that we have to major in a certain set degree, and if we change or we abandon that department, we're seen as failures. I think that change is actually an opportunity for us to recognize what's working for our hearts. And I will say that, when people ask me, do you think it was worth getting an environmental science degree despite all the hardships that you went through? I'd say yes and no. I don't have any regrets anymore majoring in environmental science. I think in my early years in undergrad, I really wanted to get out of environmental science because I really struggled with a lot of the courses, and I told this in a previous video, but I failed calculus 2 and I failed organic chemistry. So I had to retake 2 classes in my undergraduate year, and I passed them when I retook them. But I think that I knew to myself that these classes were contributing to really poor mental health to me. And it's kind of this idea, and I think this immigrant mentality for a lot of people of color, especially in Latin family households, is that I saw myself as that if I change my major, not only am I going to disappoint myself, but I'm going to disappoint my family who trusted and believed in me. And so I felt like it's not just like you're adding pressure to yourself, but you have this other external pressure of layer that's over you. And I think for me, like now I look back at it, I said I could have reduced a lot of my trauma and experiences going through academia, but I also don't regret because I loved the challenge. Don't get me wrong, I loved reading books, I loved writing, I loved learning. Like that was something that I was really passionate about. But what I didn't love was the racism from academia, the idea that an exam determines your success and your probability to do well in society. I think I see the values of tests being more of a measurement of, the material that you've learned, but it's not so much challenging to you in the real world. Because I will say honest that even as an adult and the struggles I have right now as an environmental content creator, the issues are in a different level, which I love and sometimes hate, but I don't think that, putting myself through all those experiences sometimes was necessary. But I think for now, in my younger 20s, I was such a different person. Like, if you met me in college, I will say that my friends would probably describe me as very social, very outgoing, very wanting to take risks a lot, compared to now more reserved, and I preserve my energy and really take my life to slow living because that's who I am now. But I don't think that you should ever have regrets, and I do think that I had a lot of friends who switched out of the major or went to a major that was more accessible to them. I don't like to say easier, I like to say accessible, and improve their well-being and knowing that they can learn the most in that major. So I think part of me did cling on to this status, elitist idea of, oh, it's an environmental science degree, so I have some weight. But at the end of the day, in the real world, I will be honest, a lot of people get surprised when I tell them I have an environmental science degree. They always think I'm just an influencer or some social media creator, but I actually have research published. I went through this intense program, and I also worked a lot in academia. So to me, at the end of the day, I only proved it to myself. I didn't prove it to others. So there is this idea of you just have to navigate that with your own truth. But also know it's okay if you switch out, it's okay if you stay. There's no such thing sometimes as regrets in certain contexts, of course, because at one point you wanted to do it. I have learned to give myself grace over the last few years of being in my mid-20s. I think younger Isaiah didn't give himself that grace and opportunity to experiment with mistakes and successes. And so I think for myself, I give myself that big hug to know that he put himself through that and he changed with that experience. But I also feel that if you're someone that's really thinking, is this right for me? And you're constantly having these doubts, seek conversations with friends, with your mentors, with your parents, with your siblings. It does help to talk about these things because I always tell people about my story. It wasn't really much success. It actually, a lot of the times, I would say 50% of my life was failing. And I had probably the lowest self-esteem in undergrad, even though you look at photos or my past self and I'm like, wow, I look so much happier. But internally I was going through a lot, and that itself doesn't always showcase. So stay true to yourself and knowing that whatever path you take is right for yourself, regardless of what society or parents or other people are telling you not to do. I think for myself, I had a lot of people who stopped me, and I'm thankful for them, because I do think for me it was maybe mental gymnastics to get through that. And continue to love yourself sustainably, because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to make the career for yourself, not others. The last question is, did environmental science prepare you for the real world? Now, with any type of degree, it's supposed to quote unquote prepare you for the real world, but they don't really teach you how to get a job. And unfortunately, that's the job for a lot of young people to understand how to navigate the real world. So my experiences about environmental science degree is that my senior year, the conversation shifted from what are you doing after school? Or what are you doing to go to this party? It went from do you have a job lined up? Do you have an internship lined up? Are you going to grad school? So some of my friends went to grad school. I would say if you're considering to go to grad school, know that you really want to go. There are people who just were I don't know what I want to do, so I'm going to go to grad school. And now they tell me, I think I wasted 2 years of my life because I have so much debt and I'm not even using my degree to what I wanted. I knew, I think from an early age, that I just couldn't afford grad school. I don't have any money, I don't come from any generational wealth. And yes, I know there's scholarships, but I also didn't meet those GPA scholarship requirements from undergrad. So I kind of gave up not gave up, because sometimes I think I want to go back to grad school, but I gave up on the idea of going to grad school because I said, enough is enough for me. I went through 4 years of hell, and I'll revisit this topic later. The other thing is that there's people who are always meant to work for the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector. I actually got rejected from all the environmental nonprofits. I applied to Greenpeace, 350, NRDC, WWF, all of these large white-led environmental organizations, and they all said no to me. They specifically in certain interviews, and I'm not gonna say which ones, but in all the environmental nonprofits I was applying to, both small ones and big ones, they said I didn't have good documented climate work done. And I was kind of confused by that because my experiences with environmental injustice and experiences being queer and brown in the environmental space wasn't enough for them to showcase that I had to do scalable work that was tangible to them, right? I did some activism when I was younger too, but it's not like I was in the front lines organizing. And a lot of the positions I applied for were digital media. And at the time, I will say it was the year 2017, 2018. I started Instagram in 2019, but I was on it on 2018 with a different environmental moniker name. And a lot of these environmental NGOs did not see the value of social media. They were like, it's irrelevant. Fast forward 4 years later, now they're reaching out to me to collaborate. And I don't think it's much more like I'm angry at the fact that they rejected me. I think it was a sign for me to go a different way. But I tell people that if you're not able to get into that certain industry that you always thought you were going to be in, that means that you were meant for more, or it's not the time. I actually ended up working at this creative agency, and this creative agency actually taught me a lot about social media and creative and design, which I was able to apply on queer, brown, vegan. So I'd say that it kind of came to a full circle, is that yes, I wasn't using my degree maybe the first 2 years of post-grad, but at the same time I realized I had to come back to what I learned because I didn't want that knowledge to be rotting away. And also I spent money on it. Also, I wanted to share that information to everyone. I was like, why is this privatized? So I think for me, like I really wanted to showcase this very realistic experiences that my jobs that I got after I worked at TerraCycle, then I worked at a zero waste store. All the jobs I got post-grad were through connections. So building a network of mentors and connections goes a really long way. And something I would give advice to young people is that never do this where you're strategically trying to get a mentor or network with someone so you can work for them. I would say that most of the times it's about how you humanize the conversation. Like, let's step outside of work. How's your life? What are your interests? Do you love dogs? Do you love cats? Like, do you love vegan food? Like, talking about those things is a really good way to network. But the second thing is like recognizing that it's not so much that that person may get you that direct job, it's that the people in their network and their Rolodex will get you those opportunities and resources. And so for me, I got all the jobs I have today because of networks, because I actually became friends with people. And so when young people ask me that they want to work for me, I'm like, I wish I can hire people, but I have a very limited and small team, and they're really great. But I tell people, like, it's not easy, like post-grad trying to find a job. It's really difficult, and I want to validate everyone who's been unemployed or really had difficulty finding employment, which I recommend shouting out my friend's Green Jobs Board to find out green jobs in your area, is that you have to continue believing in yourself despite getting rejections and how much that affects you psychologically, while also trying to manage that. So if you're realizing that, one industry is not working for you, try a different industry or something that's tangential to it. I think so many people get so fixated on like, I have to get this job or I have to get this. And it's like, you know what? Our life is fluid. Sometimes we just don't know. I didn't expect myself to actually work at a creative agency in New York City out of college. That was just something that came into my life. So I tell people, be open to these experiences, and regardless if you don't use your environmental science degree today, it'll come back to you another day or another lifetime. And yeah, continue to network and meet those people out there. So my final thoughts about getting an environmental science degree. Is it worth it after college? I'd say yes, it was worth it for me. I was able to actually build my brand, able to network, able to use a lot of the applied experiences to give out free educational knowledge. But I always tell people that if you're in it for the wrong reasons for yourself, you may be misaligned and confused in the work that you're doing. And know that you're such a young person, maybe you're 18 or maybe you're mid-20s or early 30s trying to figure out, is this for me? Just know we're on a different timeline and you don't need to explain to yourself anyone. So if you're passionate about the environment, get an environmental degree. And the environmental science degree is just one of the many environmental degrees that are out there. So check out your departments, check out university programs, and see what works best for you. Thank you so much again for watching this video, and please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and let me know what other videos you want to see, and if this video helped you. I actually am really interested to know what you all think.